Hello, welcome back to A Drunk History of Middle-earth. I'm Chris, I'm joined by my wife Rebecca.
Hello.
And if you haven't heard us before, we talk about Tolkien in a very easy to understand way, a very relaxed way to bring the lore to you. So Becca is my wife. She didn't know that much about Lord of the Rings when we first started it, and anything basically to do with Tolkien's Legendarium. And episode by episode, we've taught you quite a lot, right?
Yep.
And I've certainly learned a fuckload. Right, what we're talking about today is an interesting one. So this is something I've thought about before because I got really excited when I was reading The Nature of Middle-earth, because there's references to like grain and harvest and stuff like that. And then there's a lad who follows us on Instagram who I talk to every now and then. He loves, well, I say love, it's a bit of a fucking strong word. He enjoys the podcast, and that's Tony. And Tony asked me, you know, what do you think about the economies of Middle-earth or like money and stuff like that? And I gave like an answer off the top of my head, and I was like, oh, well, you know, the dwarves refer to it and blah, 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 blah. But then I thought, this actually is something that we could really dive into. And yeah, you really can dive into this.
Money, money, money.
Well, yeah, so I started with that, which was like, what is the money in Middle-earth? Because it's never really expanded upon. But then I thought, okay, well, there's some societies where it's not that easy. So money is simply a medium of exchange for goods and services. That's all money is for us. Like, money in itself, for humans, money in our real world, money in its sense doesn't have its own value. It has a value that is like designed and like adhered to and agreed upon, but it is simply a medium for exchange. So pre that, it was like bartering. So it'd be like 3 chickens is worth 1 goat, but then, you know, it might get harder and harder to do that. So when we have money where it was, right, well, a chicken is worth 1 and a goat is worth 3.
Yeah.
So, you know, then
I've got you.
Yeah, blah, 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 blah. Once upon a time, I wanted to be a mortgage advisor. So I still remember doing all the training for it.
I was going to say, like, I'm so glad that you didn't, because that explanation wasn't very enthusiastic. So I'm assuming you're not actually as enthusiastic about financial things as you once were.
No, I've just renewed our mortgage for another 2 years, and it was fucking heartbreaking. So no, I'm not that enthused. Yeah, Jesus Christ. Fuck me, right. We'll bring it round. This is more goth of an episode than the vampire and werewolves episodes.
I think it's because we're just exhausted.
I'm fine. I'm all right. So we're going to talk about the economies, because it's multiple economies of Middle-earth.
And is it economies due to different races?
Different races and just kind of like different ways of life.
Okay.
So like technically hobbits are kind of like human, but they have a kind of different economy to like say Rohan.
Yeah.
For example, or like the men of Dale and Erebor. But anyway, we'll get into it. It's more like different economies coexisting within Middle-earth. I'm going to acknowledge the sources that I've used in this, because there was a couple of really good ones that come from articles that were written. Some of them were written quite a long time ago, and that is the Economy of Gondor by Ruth Lacon, fuck knows, and Kenneth and Coinage in Middle-earth, who comes from a guy called Kenneth Fraser. So thank you, Kenneth and Ruth. Ruth. But it's from like the 90s, so I don't know. I hope they're still alive, but they might have just lost interest in Tolkien. They're never going to listen to this.
You never know.
I wonder who the most famous person to listen to this podcast is. I don't know, because quite like the last episode in particular, where we talked about Fëanor with Alec, that brought in a lot of new listeners.
Yeah, it depends what you clarify as famous as well, because that guy who plays that really goddamn amazing music.
Oh, yeah. Who's
like,
also called Alex, yeah.
Some people may really fangirl on him.
Well, Chris is on Spotify, and I listen to some of his songs.
And he's really good.
Yeah, he is. So a couple of musicians.
He could be.
Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, the rules for the day. We're going to visit as many distinct groups as we can. However, I'm mainly concerned with the third age of Middle-earth. I will make passing references to the first and second, and there will be some talking points about the first and second age, but I'm mainly concerned with the third age. So unless I'm explicitly stating it's the first or second, assume it's the third age. Okay, let's start with the Hobbits. Now, interestingly enough, right, we've kind of reached critical mass of episodes, because I was reading about the Hobbits as like Hobbits. It's my Gollum moment. I was reading about the Hobbits' economy, and I was like, hey, this seems quite familiar. And I was like, is this just stuff I've read? And it's kind of like by osmosis that, like, because there's a lot of that stuff now that I do where it's been, so we've had this podcast for a year now. Like, this is our second year of the podcast. And there's a lot of things, like, I can kind of instinctually tell if something's right or wrong about talking, like whether it's supported in the text.
Because you've read so much
Yeah, but
content.
then, so I can, off the top of my head, I can say, oh yeah, I think that's right. And then I'll go and find it, or I'll say, no, I'm pretty sure that's not that. And then I'll go and find what it actually is. So when I was reading about the Hobbits and I was looking at their economy, I was like, oh, a lot of this seems really familiar. Why? We did a whole fucking episode on the Hobbits and their origins,
Yeah, I remember the bit about
the bit about
trading as
yeah,
well.
exactly. So, so anyway, if you want a more in-depth look at the Hobbits, go back and listen to our episode about them, where I went over the origins. So there's 2 episodes we've done about the Hobbits, actually. There's the Scouring of the Shire in World War One. It's not that one, it's the origins of Hobbits, like where they come from. But a lot of what we're going to talk about now, like this, about the economy and the money and that, it actually mainly comes from The Hobbit, the book. And I think that's because it's so tonally different from Lord of the Rings, and it was published not before he had any conception of this massive world, but before The Hobbit was really, really, really tied into his mythologies of the elves and stuff. So we'll talk about the money, and then after that we're going to talk about the Men of Dale and Dorwinion and stuff, which kind of ties quite closely into the Hobbits. So the Hobbit economy, I'm going to be very upfront about this. It was simple capitalism. It was pretty simple capitalism, like England pre-industrial revolution kind of capitalism, where you have it's like an agrarian society, right? So and I've mentioned this before, where you'd have the landowners, and then you'd have the tenant farmers. So Bilbo's a landowner, and people would pay rent to him, right? Like Bilbo and Frodo, they're like the aristocracy.
Lords.
Yeah, they're like the lords, like the aristocracy, right? And people would pay rent and own on the land that they owned, and they would farm that land. They'd give some of it to Bilbo, the guy that, they might, and that's the key thing here is how they were paid. A lot of it would be paid
parsnips.
It would be paid in goods, but the Hobbits do have money, so I think some of it would be in coinage as well. But when we say an agrarian society, we mean that it was mainly kind of like agricultural, but then you had the next step up, which was the traders, the craftsmen, right? So an example is you had the landowners who owned the land, the farmers who worked the land, and let's say they had kept sheep on the land. Then when the farmers shear the sheep, they would sell the wool in the town, like in the towns in the Shire, to the textiles, or like to the what the fuck are they called?
The craftsmen.
Yeah, what the ones are called who work with wool?
Weavers?
It's like weavers, yeah. Yeah. But yeah, anyway, so they'd sell that to them, who'd then make the clothes or make the cloth and sell it to the tailor. And then the tailor would sell the clothes to the landowner, to Bilbo, for his waist jackets, for example. There's descriptions in The Hobbit of waistcoats that Bilbo has, and, that he mentions in Lord of the Rings about the Hobbits having waistcoats and blah, blah, blah. And that was because Tolkien liked waistcoats. But do you understand that simple kind of capitalism?
Yeah.
It's that someone owns the land, someone lives off the land, someone works it, sells it on, someone does something with it, and then
it's a life cycle.
Yeah, then you keep the money kind of flowing. And then we also covered in our Hobbit episode about gift giving within the Hobbit Society.
Yeah.
Now, in that episode, I do discuss whether they're a gift economy or a gift society. Now, a gift economy is quite different because there's a lot more pressure to it in a gift economy. Like an example of a gift economy would be early Scandinavian society, where people would, like jarls and stuff like that, would give out arm rings, and that was a gift economy.
Yeah.
What the Hobbits have instead is a ritualized gift-giving tradition. So instead it'd just be like socially expected.
When you go to someone's house, you take a bottle of wine.
Exactly.
Or flowers.
Yeah.
To be polite.
Yeah. But with the Hobbits, it's much more rigid. And then you go into the concept of like the 12-mile cousins, about who you give your presents to and who you don't. And
you have to take Malbec if it's a certain person.
Yeah, like when you give gifts, when you don't give gifts, etc., etc. So go back and listen to that episode if you want to know more about that. But their money, though this is new because I didn't talk about that, but their money, they do use money. They use gold and silver coins, and there are there's cut content, cut parts of The Hobbit that never made it to print that refer to brass and tin coins as well. So an example of money being used is from the book The Hobbit, where Bilbo is talking about Bilbo's parents, and it says, not that Belladonna Tuck ever had any adventures after she became Mrs. Bungo Baggins. Bungo, that was Bilbo's father, built the most luxurious hobbit hole for her, and partly with her money. That was to be found either under the hill or over the hill, blah, blah, blah. And then the next passage is Bilbo when he's talking to Gandalf and the dwarfs. He says, all the same, I should like it all plain and clear, said he obstinately, putting on his business manner, usually reserved for people who tried to borrow money off him. So we know that the hobbits use money.
Yeah.
Then in Lord of the Rings, there is 2 more references regarding hobbits and money. The first one is when they're at Bree,
I was going to say, is that when they're at the Prancing Pony?
It's when they're in Bree and Frodo has to buy a new pony.
Ah.
And he buys it for 12 silver pennies, which is apparently 3 times its value. So they had market prices that the hobbits were aware of, and whoever sold them the pony in Bree, I can't remember who it was, but they sold it over the odds, and Frodo knew it was over the odds, so they had a kind of stable economy. And then I've mentioned about the brass and tin not being made, and at one point, the currency in the Shire was going to be called the ducat, which is actually a real life coin that was used in the Middle Ages, particularly around Italy. That didn't make the final cut, and the coins are never mentioned. And the last one is that Gandalf, when they're at the Council of Elrond, when he finds out that Strider travelled with the hobbits, he says that piece of news would have been worth a gold coin, but never mentioned what the gold coin's called.
So do you think the hobbits forged those coins themselves?
Oh, that's such a good...
Because I was curious as to how crafty the hobbits were. So like what skills and that they actually possessed. Because obviously we don't hear a lot about them forging swords and weaponry. So do they have the capabilities to forge money?
I am so glad you asked that, because I couldn't find an answer. I also thought that. Do they mint their own coins? And then I thought, I went a bit like crazy out there, and I was like, right, nobody knew the Shire really existed, outside of Eriador, and the Kingdom of Arnor, which is the North Kingdom to Gondor's South Kingdom, right? The Kingdom of Arnor used to use the Shire as fertile farmland. So could it just be that they have such a closed economy, or there is such a small leakage that they are using coins that were minted in the early Third Age? And I thought, could it be that? And then I thought, well, might they have their own mints? And I just don't know. If anybody can tell me, please do. I will say that from the breadth of research I've had to do for this episode, this has been a challenging episode to research because the scarceness of the material. But at the same time, because there's so many different areas I've covered, it still took me a long time.
Yeah.
It's not like, here's 1 point, move on. It's kind of like you've got to chase down the footnotes and you've got to chase everything down. So if anyone knows of references to mints within the Shire, like minting your own coins, not like fucking breath mints. So we know they trade with Bree, so they must at least have a common currency there. Or there is enough hobbits in Bree that they will accept hobbit currency. Do you know, like everywhere in the UK except Scottish banknotes as well as English banknotes?
Yeah.
It's legal tender. Could it be like that? Could it be that Bree has its own currency, but they will always accept hobbit money because there is enough hobbits moving, because hobbits live in Bree, that there is enough movement between the Shire and Bree.
You can easily get rid of it.
Well, no, it's just that it's still legal tender.
Yeah.
It's still legal tender, so it's still going to move.
You say that, but every time I've ever paid with a Scottish note, it's as if I've come from the planet Mars.
I've literally never, ever had an issue with it.
Have you not?
Never.
Oh, I have.
Never. Another thing the Shire does is export pipeweed.
I bet they do.
Now, this is... I say export with some quotes because with one notable exception, it stays fairly local. And again, to Bree and places like that, right, where big folk live. But there's another one we'll get into. So we know that they trade in pipeweed and that the hobbits were the first ones to start smoking it and blah, blah, blah. There is a hobbit by the name of Pimple Pimple is a nickname, who sells pipeweed to Saruman, and he's been doing it for a couple of years. And then...
Holier than thou, Saruman.
Exactly, and that's when they, Merry and Pippin find...
his stash.
I think it's Longbottom Leaf, they find it at Isengard.
Yeah.
I think it's the chapter's called Flotsam and Jetsam, and it's just in the wreckage of Isengard. So we know that Saruman at least buys it from them. And he'd been buying it from Pimple, and this was quite an interesting, going back to our scouring of the Shire episode, because Pimple is the nickname of Lothar Sackville Baggins, and this is the same hobbit that Grima Wormtongue might very well have eaten.
Oh.
Do you know when he's ordered to, Saruman said he killed him in his sleep, he stabbed him, but then he also, Saruman makes a reference to him being eaten. So, when everyone went away on the journeys, Lothar began buying lots of property in the South Shire and exporting pipeweed, and then after it slowly increased where he started to just sell more and more goods to people outside of the Shire. Which tells us that it didn't happen too much in that it was a notable event. Like they were saying, he started to sell it to people from the south without, the inference being that it's unusual to sell to people outside of the Shire on that scale.
Yeah.
So, we can see there what type of economy we're dealing with. And the people of the south he was selling to were mainly the thugs and bandits under the Order of Saruman. So that's Hobbits. Is there anything you wanted to pick up on before we moved on with them?
No, I just want to know about where they're getting these coins from.
Yeah, probably minting their own coins, because they have things like mills and stuff like that, right? So that they do...
I don't believe it.
They do stuff like that. But then I thought out there, maybe there's just like there was a giant hoard of coins that's just passed around, and that's how they maintain a stable economy with like no inflation or anything like that, where it's just... And because you got the ritualized gift giving, because I think Bilbo gives away pennies at his party as well, like a couple of pennies. So because you've got ritualized gift giving, the money's always kind of in circulation.
Yeah.
So I don't know. And then obviously you've got the treasure that Bilbo brings back from his adventure.
Yeah, so they like shiny things.
That's interesting then, because the coins he brought back, might be silver and gold coins, but they wouldn't have like the same markings as the one he did. Interesting though. So we're going to cover Rohan and Gondor as separate ones, but I've got this section which I've just called Other Humans, including Dale and Dorwinion. And I've got another passage from The Hobbit, which says, "Then the master hesitated and looked from one to the other." This is when Thorin and the elves are arguing in Lake Town. "The elven king was very powerful in these parts, and the master wished for no enmity with him, nor did he think much of old songs, giving his mind to trade and tolls, to cargoes and gold, to which habit he owed his position." So straight away we see that the men of Lake Town, or like formerly of Dale, whatever, very well aware of trade, right? And what I've discovered in this, researching this, is there's this like whole little hidden economy in the north of Middle-earth, where you've got Dorwinion in the far east, you've got Mirkwood with the elves, you've got the Iron Hills, you've got Erebor, and you've got Lake Town and then Dale. And they're all like trading with each other quite freely. And it's quite detailed when you start to look into it, which I thought was like fucking fascinating. And then when the master, in the Hobbit book, when the master is removed from his position, when people are shouting they want Bard to take over, someone shouts from the crowd that they have had enough of money counters. Reading between the lines, you know that there's going to be like treasuries or like taxes, and that there's some form of accounting.
Yeah, and there's going to be people that are debtors. Exactly,
creditors and debtors, yeah. And then Dorwinion, which I've just mentioned, is a special place because this is one of the notable places. Like, they have a core export, and their core export is wine. But a little bit about the place for anyone who's not familiar with it. Dorwinion it's this place far to the east of Middle-earth, right? Very, very far to the east. And it's on the shores of the Sea of Rhûn. So the Rhûn is an area in Middle-earth. And in Sindarin, it just means east. So it's the far eastern part of Middle-earth, right? And it's got a gigantic lake, which is an inland sea called the Sea of Rhûn. And Dorwinion is on the shores of this place. And Dorwinion...
Good irrigation.
Yeah, is renowned for its wine.
For all them grapes.
Yeah. And in the Third Age, they make a very, very strong wine that Thranduil of Mirkwood loves. And that's the wine that they all get drunk on at the feast. And
I think I found my people.
Aye. So another note about the Sea of Rhûn is that, do you remember when we were talking about the Teleri and they were making the great journey?
Yeah.
Towards Aman? This is where they stopped and really got to grips with how to use boats properly on this inland sea.
Okay.
And so it may have been popular. Dorwinion, we don't know anything about it, barring some very kind of sparse information. So we know that the barrels that the hobbits, that Bilbo and the dwarves escaped in.
They're not wine barrels,
They are wine barrels. Yeah, they are. They are. A lot of them are wine barrels, and they are destined for Dorwinion. And this is this trade network I'm gonna talk about, right? Because this wine comes to Mirkwood, they drink it. They send the barrels back down the river to Lake Town, where either the barrels are filled up with goods like butter and apples is notably mentioned, and sent back up to Mirkwood, or people from Dorwinion make their way to Lake Town, where they will collect their barrels, and they might also fill them with goods from Lake Town and then return to Dorwinion with the barrels. And then the next time a shipment of wine is needed, they will send it back up the river as far as they can, and then once they've exhausted that, they take it by cart overland. So yeah, it's this whole trade network. And Dorwinion, it might have been populated by men, which seems to be like the prevailing thought, is that it was men. But no, I found something very nerdy, and I found something very exciting. For me, and possibly for anyone else who...
Is it homosexual? Is that why it's exciting to you?
No. You threw me off. Because straight away I was like, I've already told her.
Wine and men.
I've already told her if we split up, I'm just going to shag a trans person, just see what it's like. Anyway, right. So what's interesting is that Darwinian might have been populated by but there is also some speculation that it might have been populated by Avari or Nandor elves. And for anyone who's not aware, Avari is the elves who didn't ever want to go to Aman. They didn't ever want to leave Middle-earth when the elves first went. And the Nandor are the ones who started the journey, but then for whatever reason turned back. And the reason that this might be, because it might be populated by Avari or Nandor elves, is that Darwinian is a Sindarinized name, which means what is it? It means like young land country. So like it's a Sindarin name, and even if it is a Manish town, it is a testament to just how far the Sindarin language has spread to be that far east.
Yeah.
But I also found this really fucking weird reference, right? That it's probably one of the first times I've looked at something and I thought, like, Jolkin, why did you feel the need to give detail about that? So there's this magazine called Parma El Lamberon, and this was issue number 17 I was looking at, right? And it's a journal of linguistic studies in which Tolkien wrote extensive like syntax backgrounds for the words and phrases in other languages of his that appear in Lord of the Rings and what have you. And there's one reference in this, in issue number 17, one reference to Darwinian, and he says that he talks about Darwinian, and he says it's a Sindarinized name, but then he says, but the Avari and the Nandor didn't learn how to make wine until after the other elves. And I was just like, what? How is that fucking important? When is that ever going to be fucking relevant? Well, it's relevant now. But
he knew.
Yeah, I was like...
He knew we would be making this podcast episode.
He made a point to say that the Avari and the Nandor elves didn't learn how to cultivate vines or vineyards until after the other elves who did go to, like, Beleriand and Aman, which I just thought was it's the first time I've ever been researching something and I just kind of sat back and I was like, what's the fucking point in knowing that? It's just
you've just done that.
Well, yeah, I know.
Me with most of the language, I'm like, alright. Like how
it was just such a bizarrely specific thing. Fucking hell. Right. That's it pretty much for the Darwinian and what have you. So
they're my favourite so far.
Yeah, the heady wine, the strong wine that knocks elves to sleep. Let's talk about Gondor. The chief currency, so we've got some actual information here. In Gondor, they do have a currency called the Castar in Westron, which is like the common language. So it's the Castar. In Sindarin, the same coin was called a Mirian. And there's no real information about what this coin was made out of, but it wasn't silver, because the smaller coins they used were silver, and they were called Thani in Westron and Kanath in Sindarin. So, if I ever find reference to gold coins of Gondor being the bigger ones and the silver ones being the smaller, then maybe the Hobbits are using the same currency, which would be very interesting, considering coins that would be recognised and minted for or in Gondor would then be missing to a country that they had no knowledge of.
Is that why Hobbits have quite big pockets?
For all the coins, yeah. You dick.
Well, they're a different size to humans. That's what I meant.
Yeah, whatever. So the footnote in Peoples of Middle-earth, where I got the name of the currency from, it mentions that Mirian is Noldorin, but then Mirian seems to be taken from the Sindarin word Mir, which means jewel, like M-I-R. So I'm a little bit unsure about where the Noldoran part of that comes from. But Gondor, how does it feed itself? Well, they seem to do a lot of farming. Now, this is an interesting part because watching the films like you have, you would never guess at this, because in Book 5 of Lord of the Rings, it describes Minas Tirith as Gandalf and Pippin approach it. And it's outside of Minas Tirith on the Pelennor Fields. There is a fuckload of arable, fertile land. We don't see that in
Oh,
the
it
films.
doesn't look like that.
No, don't see that in the films.
Looks barren.
Yeah, it says, for 10 leagues or more, it ran from the mountain's feet and so back again, encircling in its fence the fields of the Pelennor. Fair and fertile townlands on the long slopes and terraces, falling to the deep levels of the Anduin. The townlands were rich, with wide tilth and many orchards, and homesteads there were with oast and garner, fold and byre, and many rills rippling through the green from the highlands down to the Anduin. So very fertile farmland. That's how they feed themselves, right? And then the article by Ruth Lacon in Malone 31, published in December 1994, a year I was nearly 2 when that came. You weren't even born. I was nearly 2 when that came out. So she examined some of the possibilities for Gondor's economy, and she posits that, like the Roman Empire, the wealth of Gondor comes from the land, right? That makes sense. And they produce both food and raw materials like fibre, leather, wool, horn and timber. So far, not 100 miles away from the Shire, right? Then you move on to the industrial parts, which is a little bit different from the Shire because it's like it's that use of the word industrial. Like it's kind of explicitly there that industry is bad in the Shire. But then you've got, like, what she means by that is like tanners, blacksmiths, breweries, pottery making, blah blah blah. So, but I think the difference between trade, like artisans and industry, is just the scale on what you're doing it.
Yeah.
And I think the scale for Gondor would have to be
whether
a lot
you
bigger.
could sell it on Etsy or not.
Yeah, exactly. And then she says, like, so from naturally from all of that, we see like primary materials being produced, then refined with like raw materials being produced, then refined by the industrial, the artisans, the traders, whatever. So naturally from that, we see taxes being collected, and then we work in its way back up towards the king's treasury, which would have to be a central function, which is pay for those lovely halls of Minas Tirith. So revenue collection and expenditure would be important to the whole effort in trade. And she says that trade would be used mainly for obtaining goods that could not be produced locally, and likewise selling things in excess locally that would be scarce elsewhere. So being placed close to the Anduin River and the Bay of Belfalas, their ability to transport goods would be excellent, giving them further reach than just going overland. Because at its height, Gondor's territory actually included the Sea of Rune, which is very far to the north and east. So and you think of it an empire, like an empire would have to trade. So think of all the different climates. So they'd be trading amongst the whole like empire, right? Wouldn't they? The being close to the water would give them a much better transport network, and it means that occasionally there'd be issues with like the corsairs of Umbar, like the pirates. But depending on when we were talking about, that'd be an issue because a lot of the time they had them under control, and so broadly they'd be fine. But it's a bit shaky. But I'm gonna speculate that I think that throughout at least the whole Third Age or the entirety of Gondor, I think there was just that one coin, the Castar. I think like that one currency, because we don't have any other information to go on. So I think that I don't think currency would change very much. Or hopefully it wouldn't. So yeah, like the whole, on a reasonable economic scale, we could essentially say farm to table where you can, sell anything that's left over, or import anything. So like the thing is, like as they go like further south and further east, they'd probably start doing shit like the real world did. It's like bring back spices and other stuff.
I was going to say, it sounds like the tea trade.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. So like they'd probably trade exotic stuff, right? Like the wine from Dorwinion.
I'm still on board with
no-brainer. Yeah,
with their culture. I still think they're top.
Yeah, I think so. Then they'd probably get horses from Rohan, right? Like stuff like that. And when we talk about Mordor, we'll see about like trading for horses and that. And I think that's pretty much how, like, as much as I can say about Gondor, is that it seems to be a feudal kind of like big empire type system, or like a Roman Empire type system of taxes, expenditure, like produce locally, export excess, pay your dues to the treasury, and that's used for like roads and stuff like that. That's as much as I can really say, I think.
Right, so the most exciting people are not them. Boring. No. Let's stick to the wine people.
Yeah, well, yes.
You've still yet to convince me otherwise.
So as a last note, naturally, if you're talking about Gondor, Numenor comes up as well. I could not find a fucking thing about Numenor and its economy. It's all mixed up because we know they voyaged to Middle-earth, and this is all my speculation, and there's a good chance that I might have missed something key here. But we know that they voyaged to Middle-earth the Númenóreans. They traded with the locals, and over time they became wealthy from doing this, right? And then first they visited as like benevolent people. Then slowly over time they became essentially like tyrants and dictators coming from the sea, and that's how they grew their wealth. So my speculation is that first they came as mediators and healers with their advanced knowledge, because they were like to people of Middle-earth as elves were to humans. Like there was that much of a gap in advancement. So at first I think they came as like wise people, as healers, like mediate conflict, help you out of a jam, blah, blah, blah. And people would give them gifts. And that's how they got it initially. But then as time went on,
They stole them.
I think these gifts became expected. And then as they got more and more like corrupted and greedy, that it eventually become taxes. And that's something I'd want to look at more in an episode about Númenor as a whole. But that for mine is my speculation, that you would see that slow corruption of going from freely given and accepted gifts to expected taxes. So then we've got Rohan, the horse lords. And what do we think they traded with? Probably something they had a lot of.
Let's hope it's wine.
Wind. They had lots of wind. Chief output is wind power. No, it's horses. And it's mentioned sparsely though. Like, so the Rohirrim existed for about 500 years before the War of the Ring. Before that, they were the Northmen, and they were like shepherds, herdsmen, blah blah blah. So, and there is very sparse references to farms and farming within Rohan. So I think they would still generally be a little bit of subsistence farming, like you farm to live, but their main exports would be like their horses or stuff like that. And there's an excellent song called The Lament for the Rohirrim, and it was written by apparently a forgotten poet of Rohan, and he says, "Where is the helm and the hauberk and the bright hair flowing? Where is the hand on the harp string and the red fire glowing? Where is the spring and the harvest and the tall corn growing?" So that's one of the only references, is that like they grew corn. We knew that, we grew corn, but corns are very...
It's like basic.
Yeah, so
food.
yeah, so
It's not.
yeah, so it's not too super advanced. So it's probably just subsistence farming, and then sell horses if you need to, or just live off the land as much as you can and enjoy being the horse lords. They would have traded with Gondor though, like 100%, because they had friendship and what have you. And Mordor tried to buy horses off them, and when they refused, they stole them. Right, so Sauron tried to trade with his economy, right? So, and I think that they didn't have as rich of an economy as Gondor, but I think they still had wealth. And I think this wealth comes from their horses, but also the Horde of Scartha, which was the dragon, if you remember from our dragon episode. And this is the one that the cheeky bastard got himself killed by the dwarves. So Scartha had a horde that the Rohirrim kept from the dwarves of the Ered Mithrin, which is the Grey Mountains, who thought it was rightfully theirs because, you know, it was Scartha's horde. And an ancestor of the Rohirrim called Fram, son of Frumgar, killed the dragon and then argued with the dwarf over the treasure. And he was killed by the dwarves after he sent them the teeth of the dragon and said, "Jewels such as these you will not match in your treasuries, for they are hard to come by." So yeah, they had wealth, but there's little information on the trade. So maybe trading cool shit, subsist. A lot of economies come back to like how are your people feeding themselves, and that never really seems to be a problem in it never really seems to be a problem in Tolkien's works.
But if it's so important that if it's such a big deal that these people are actually called the horse people,
yeah, it's
pretty
probably
much.
Yeah, it's probably horse breeding.
They're like,
yeah,
they're probably the best of the best in training the best horses. They've got like a niche part of the market. So, because you don't hear about anyone else trading horses.
No, just ponies.
So, but the ponies a bit shit, isn't it?
Yeah. I think a lot of the economies boil down to...
Not many of them can ride ponies.
No. I think the economies tend to, in Tolkien's works, they always tend to boil down to, like, with apart from Gondor, which seems to have the most established one, and the Hobbits, which is kind of the most like circular capitalistic one. It's just more about like what is the one thing you can trade in?
What can you bring to the table that's different?
Yeah, it's not much more complex beyond like horse people.
What do you think you could bring to the table in Tolkien's universe?
Ooh, in Tolkien's universe.
'Cause it's certainly not wood whittling.
No. Ooh. Wrestling. I could wrestle.
Okay.
I think that might be it. Wrestle people. Be someone to wrestle against.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
What about you?
Funeral care.
Mint. Yeah.
No, I'm joking. I'm not quite sure. I don't think I've got anything exciting to give.
Funeral care might be actually a pretty fucking valid one, you know.
Like, I could charge like staff of mine to care, like after battles. You know how we're talking about the cleanup effort in wars.
Yeah.
Like, who goes round all these piles of bodies? I would be the person that would identify, do the burials. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, good one. All right, fair dues. The dwarves. Now, this was an interesting one. I think this is the most interesting part. And I think naturally the dwarves just are tied up. They're intrinsically tied in with trade on like a fundamental level for the character, for the whole concept of the race. So dwarves begin, the economy that we're going to talk about begins in the Second Age, when the dwarves forged an alliance with the Northmen of Middle-earth, some of whom would be the ancestors of the Rohirrim. And this is when the dwarves learned the speech of men. And it's written that this relationship that the dwarves had with the men of the North became the blueprint for their relationships with all humans going forward. So, the humans would provide the food in exchange for services, right? So the humans were herdsmen, shepherds, land tillers, and then they would also, and this is importantly, dwarves never tamed animals of their own, and they never rode horses. Gimli is very unusual for riding a horse. Because of this, the humans would also act as scouts, because at that time they were still in big danger of being attacked by orcs. In return for this food, they would be the builders, the miners, the road makers, and the crafters of all things requiring skill, which I'll talk about in a little bit. This was ridiculously tilted in the dwarves' favour, though, because it meant that they didn't have to worry about food, so they could 100% devote themselves to their crafts, which allowed them to maintain and increase the gap in skills. Like, do you know, like, but in World War II, right, Germany was so effective because the whole country was mobilised into a military force. The whole country became the war machine.
Yeah.
Every dwarf, except for very rare occurrences, could devote themselves 100% to their craft. They didn't have to worry about hunting.
Sounds mint.
Didn't have to worry about hunting, farming, none of that. It was
just like level up.
Exactly.
Like a sim.
Yeah.
And you put that sim on, like...
Yeah, and they became unparalleled crafters because of that.
Yeah.
Well, they were already unparalleled before that because they've always had these kind of relationships, it seems.
I've thought of my talent, by the way.
Go on.
I think I would be the potion maker. I'd be the one who could cure a lot of things because I like foraging, don't I? Like when I walk the dog, I like to pick berries and things and eat them. And I can identify a lot of plants. So I think I'd be like a herbologist and I would be able to make crazy cures for people. And I'm a good carer. Oh, no. Really. Yeah. I've nursed a lot of... I mean, they're usually dogs, but... I'm like the nurse, aren't I, in the family. When people are ill or like our pets are ill, I'm always sent...
See, I don't trust you because...
I know you don't get any sympathy, but you're my husband.
No, the first thing you said was funeral care. Then you said, I'll give people potions. You're just going to live off your own work. I'm so sorry the potion didn't work, but did I mention I also sell coffins?
Keep myself in business.
Right, so dwarves, if there was ever so I said that they didn't like to do their own food and that, but if there was really, really hard times, then the dwarves had invented a plough that they designed that they could drag themselves to till the land, like, so, because they never tamed any animals and humans did, so that's kind of what set humans apart. But they hated this because they didn't want to be doing that. And I mentioned some of the other skills apart from being like a miner and stuff like that. Some of the skills are mentioned in the Song of Durin, which you are very familiar with, which I'll read from. And this is hands down my joint first favourite poem of all time, the other one being The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. But anyway, so in the Song of Durin, it's written, "A king he was on carven throne, in many pillared halls of stone, with golden roof and silver floor, and runes of power upon the door. The light of sun and star and moon, in shining lamps of crystal hewn, undimmed by cloud or shade of night, there shone forever fair and bright. Their hammer on the anvil smote, their chisel clove and graver wrote. Their forged was blade and bound was hilt, the delver mined, the mason built. Their beryl, pearl, and opal pale, and metal wrought like fisher's mail. Buckler and corslet, axe and sword, and shining spears were laid in hoard." So that kind of encapsulates
beautiful
the whole society in terms of what they were crafting. Is like, this was their jam 100%. This was all the shit they were doing.
Yeah, it's better than my example I was going to provide.
Yeah, and if anybody if anybody did want to listen to a really good version of the Song of Durin, have a go at the Clamavi de Profundis version. You can find it on YouTube and Spotify and that. It's fucking unbelievable. So this relationship, right, between the Northmen in the Second Age and the Dwarves culminated in a relationship that we are very familiar with. It's the relationship, we see this in the Third Age. It's the men of Dale, or like Lake Town, and the dwarves of Erebor. So it was interrupted slightly by Smaug fucking things up, and then Thorin being a dick. But it then, it got really back on track by the time of the War of the Ring, to the point where King Brand and Dane Ironfoot died together before the doors of Erebor. So that whole relationship came from this alliance, the trade alliance in the Second Age.
Yeah.
And then another thing is that in The Hobbit, the book, the dwarves are described as being calculating folk with a good idea of the value of money, which is mad because dwarves also dealt in money as well as goods. And because they mention, again in The Hobbit, that there was a time where the poorest dwarf always had money to spend and lend.
That sounds like my dad.
Yeah, and it said there are references. So it's like, and there's also like references to interest and stuff like that. So we know that despite the fact that their economy seemed to be very much based on services for goods, right? That was like the one way. It was like, I'll provide the services, you provide the goods. They did have a quite an advanced idea of like loans and wealth accumulation and stuff like that, which is pretty fucking cool. Another thing that I wanted to bring up, right, and I think this is fascinating, and I thought it was funny, is that the dwarves and the hobbits are the only ones who seem to be aware of coffee. And it's
because they've got to keep awake.
Well, Gandalf as well. But when Bilbo serves like he's got a jug of coffee on the fire when the dwarves come to visit him for tea. So someone's got to grow that, right? And then this is a very weird turn for the show. So I like to think that dwarves grew this because coffee can grow in the mountains and it grows better at higher altitudes, essentially. So in today's world, a lot of the flavors we associate with good coffee come from coffee grown at high altitudes. It gives you better flavor and less pests and disease.
You went down such a fucking hole researching.
You know what? I was on the Cafe Nero website.
Yeah, you're crackers, man.
I said to you today, I was like, I need 2 hours to finish the script, right?
No, you deep dive.
I spent 15 minutes on the Cafe Nero website reading about how coffee grows at different elevations.
I think you spent more time than that, Chris.
I didn't. No, it's got a nice little chart. But so I like to think that the dwarves grew this up on the mountains in like nice temperatures, and that was one of the things they would export. But I just can't believe that for a Lord of the Rings or a Tolkien podcast, I was on the fucking Cafe Nero website looking up coffee.
That's our new business venture. Lotte Coffee.
Oh, God. Oh, there is people who do stuff like that, though.
Is there?
Yeah, there's
it's always been done, isn't it? Like everything's been done now.
There's like a Middle Earth tea range, but I don't know about a coffee one. But also, like last podcast on the left, they do their Spring Heel Jack coffee, don't they?
Really?
Yeah. They've got their own coffee brand. But yeah, there's a page on Instagram or like a shop or something where people do like Middle Earth. Someone's doing like Middle Earth tea infusions, and
That sounds funky.
Yeah,
That sounds cool.
I no idea, but yeah, anything you can do. There's Middle Earth candles and stuff like that as well. Like anything you can fucking merchandise.
Think of, yeah.
Someone's doing it. Yeah. It's mental. There was someone the other day actually. There's a creator called Tiwa Tolkien, and she'd signed a book deal, and it I didn't look too much into it because I saw a post and it was like it's about how the lessons learned and allowing yourself being changed from something to do. But I think it's something to do with Catholicism because it's quite a Catholic kind of leaning thing. And the publisher is called Ave Maria Books, and I think that's something to do with Catholicism, isn't it?
It's Italian.
Well, I know, but I don't think Tiwa Tolkien's Italian. I think she's
Yeah.
maybe American. Anyway, fuck knows. Point being, everything to do with everything in Middle Earth has been done.
Yeah.
Even this podcast, there's a lot of Tolkien podcasts, but I think our niche is breaking the stuff down in a way that I would want to explain to me.
Yeah, like we're not pompous or pretentious, which I think sometimes Tolkien can lead to pompous and pretentious, but being the person that you are and the child that you were, you like, I think of you as a child as Matilda. Like, books were your family and Tolkien and the books were your family. And the background you came from, like, I think there's a lot to learn from Tolkien, and I think making it approachable and accessible to people is the best thing. You shouldn't make it into a group of people who have all this knowledge and kind of take everything to the far end in the way that they sometimes do. Like, you know those people where they just use big words to kind of put people off. It should be accessible to everyone.
That is 100% is why I started this podcast, and I came to you with the idea, and I said, right, let's do this. And you were like, yeah, I'll do an episode. Yeah, I'll do one episode.
Through osmosis, I've definitely learned a lot. And even when you're talking during recording, I'm like, oh, God, that clicks. Oh, that's clicked into place.
Well, I don't know if you ever hear me when we're having our book club discussions as well. Like,
yes, I do.
When I'm talking about that as well. Because and that's a fine line between, like, this is what I want this podcast to be, and this is what this podcast will always remain, right? I will explain things in the simplest way I can. Not because I don't think that people wouldn't understand it otherwise. That is 100% not the case. It's that I want it to be fun, and fucking easy to learn, because a lot of it is locked almost behind a lot of research you have to do, and there's so much content there that I just want to. This is going to sound so fucking bizarre, right? I always think of it as I just want to bring these fantastic stories to as many people as I can in the easiest way for everybody to understand it.
And I think even the people who you associate with, so quite a lot of the people that you speak to potentially don't have the way that you have in terms of your attitude and your personality to bring it to other audiences.
Do you know what's interesting, right? So for anybody who doesn't know, I'm an engineer by trade. I work in security, right?
He's not a tinkerer.
No. A big part of my role, my job, is explaining technical things to people who could not and cannot and do not want to understand and do not give a single shit. So you've got to explain it in a way that everybody can understand, who whatever call I'm on, like everyone can understand why this is an issue and why we need to fix this. And I think that has really lent itself to the podcast, to be honest, like, because it's not, you don't diminish the message by making it sure that everyone can understand it. But anyway, massive fucking tangent. If you're enjoying the podcast, great. If you don't, why are you still listening? It's like fucking an hour in. Go away. Right, the last thing I want to mention about the dwarves. During the Second Age, there was a great cooperation between Eregion, it was a country of elves that was founded in the Second Age, and it pushed right up against the doors of Durin, where you see in the film, like, the Watcher in the Water. Do you know when, like, the the speak friend and enter and stuff.
Yeah.
So that water wasn't always there. That water crept up because of like changes and stuff like that. But those doors used to be open constantly to trade with the elves. And it was the doors were built between Celebrimbor the elf, who also forged the 3 elven rings, and well, the rings of power essentially, and the dwarf Navi, who are the 2 greatest craftsmen of the Second Age. And what's really aggravating is there's one throwaway line that's just never expanded on, which said that when the doors were open, there was unfettered trade between the dwarves of Moria and the elves of Eregion. What this trade is, we don't fucking know. But given that it's dwarves, I dare say it's probably just food for labour. That's the best guess I could give it. Oh, and that's it. That's it for dwarves. Is there anything else you want to talk about? How did dwarves stack up to Darwinion?
So I think they're on par.
Yeah.
And I also just want to add my little part. So when you were saying the evidence was that little lovely poem, and you've read it out beautifully.
Oh, the Song of Durin.
And I said, oh, well, my evidence wasn't as great. I was going to say, hi ho, it's off to work we go.
Yeah.
That's my evidence. No, it's still relevant.
Yeah, exactly. You're laughing at yourself. I'm not laughing at you. That is evidence.
Like it's what dwarves are known for, that they're hard workers.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So I think my dad's a dwarf, thinks he's poor, has loads of savings, is making loads of money.
Never stops working.
Loves working.
Never cooks for himself. Oh, shit,
my dad is a dwarf.
Your dad's a dwarf. He hasn't got a beard.
He's
though.
really crafty, like
He
a
is.
proper
He's very
good
crafty.
craftsman.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah.
He's not bearded though.
We can't be perfect.
Unless your mum's his beard. Right, we've only got a couple more. So, Mordor and Isengard. I included Isengard along with Mordor because Isengard essentially is a fiefdom of Mordor. And with the exception of pipeweed and possibly some other supplies, it functions exactly the same as Mordor. Mordor, which I'm going to talk about in a second, it is a particular type of economy. But what I find interesting is that Mordor, within itself, its own economy, has a certain type, but it is willing to engage in fair trade with other countries, seen by the fact that it tries to buy horses from Rohan. It tries to buy them until Rohan said no, and then orcs ran in and stole only the black horses and like the black foals and stuff like that. And so we know that Sauron, being a Maiar of Aule, he wants everything ordered to his will. So fair trade in an established pattern, that kind of makes sense. I understand that. And but the whole of Mordor is based on slaves, right? And I heard the phrase slave-based command economy, which means that, and someone likened it again to the Roman Empire, that the whole of Mordor's economy is based upon slave labour, which every single output is used to further the military. And that essentially is what Sauron is doing, is that everything in Mordor works towards building his might so that he could dominate the rest of Middle-earth. And I don't know if you knew this, but there's an area of Mordor that's called the Sea of Nirnin.
Shockingly, I didn't.
Oh, right, okay. I wasn't being...
I wasn't
being facetious. I
totally wouldn't have known that.
Right, okay. So there's an area... Right, so Mordor is not just what you see in the films of like the ash and the barren stuff, right?
I kind of just think of Mordor as like a big field.
Right. No.
I know that sounds bad, but like just a big barren area.
Yeah, it's not, no.
So they've tunneled into.
That is... That's that one area we see, right, around Orodruin. But there is an inland sea. 2 inland seas this episode. We've never fucking mentioned them before. There's 2 this episode. The inland sea of Nirnin, which is a salt sea.
Is that what like bursts its banks? No, it doesn't. Like, is that what the dam thing's holding?
No, that's the River Isen, not Isengard.
Ah, okay.
So the inland sea of Nirnin has massive fields around it, and these fields are very, very, very fertile farmland because of the volcanic ash from Orodruin. And these fields are all tended by slaves. And all of these slaves and all of these fields plant, harvest, till, farm, all to fuel the armies and feed the armies of Mordor, right? And that is, and every single, and then you've got like the smiths, the workers, like they might grow like flaxseed or something like that and spin it into like linen, or they might like raise sheep to shear for wool, and they'll turn it into clothes to pad the armor, and then they'll mine the iron ore out of the hills to then turn it over to the blacksmiths to then make armor and weapons. Like every single thing, in just like Germany in World War II, and please forgive me, anyone who's just saying, well, Tolkien eschewed contemporary politics. I understand that. And I know that Mordor is not a direct analogue to World War II Germany. It's just not, right?
Well, it's just war, isn't it?
Yeah, it's exactly. I'm just using it as an example of a whole country turned into a military-industrial economy. And that's exactly what it does. Everything in Mordor, everything in their economy is geared towards arming and improving the military. So that's essentially their whole kind of economy. And then Isengard during the War of the Ring, essentially it's exactly the same thing. He's doing it slightly differently in a different place, but it's all designed to bring it all together to be military industrial. And that's the big thing about them, is that the industry and the scale of what they're doing and the damage they're doing to like the environment while they're doing it, like ripping up the Fangorn forest to fuel their military economy.
But
Because it's all based on conquest.
you've got to think as well, good will always beat evil, because evil has an end. Evil is like these guys are using all the resources, they're raping the land, and the land can only give so much, so they would still meet their end. Well, whether people survived it, they would still meet an end. But imagine like one little turn of events that made it into something good.
That's
like
catastrophe.
This system that they've got going is so efficient and effective. How good that could be.
Yeah. Do you know what's interesting is that you've hit on two concepts Tolkien expounded upon without realising it. The first one being that he said, I don't believe in ultimate evil, but I do believe... I don't believe in objective evil, but I do believe in objective good. Tolkien has explicitly said that he thinks the world is ultimately and objectively good, ultimately good, because Eru, God, created the world, which is good. Even if evil things happen in it, the world itself still remains good. So he says, I don't believe in objective evil, but I do believe in objective good. So that's your first point. The second one about like what can turn it to good, or what can be that one thing. And then there's that quote about the small hands turn the wheel of fate. And when things happen in Tolkien, or when all seems lost and something happens to allow you to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat, that's eucatastrophe. So yeah, and we do see that. The Eagles, for example, good eucatastrophe. Gollum misstepping and falling into the lava of Mount Doom, that's eucatastrophe. So yeah, you're right. Like these economies essentially, they do amount to nothing in the end, because Eru's will is still done. And the last one we're going to talk about today is the elves.
Dun, dun, dun.
Now, yeah,
is this a massive portion?
It's not.
Wow.
I thought it was going to be.
Me too.
Not as big as I thought. So the elves. So firstly, I watched a very good video by a channel called In Deep Geek, who I do enjoy watching his videos, and he talked about the elvish economy, and there were some of his points I didn't agree with, because he didn't mention things that are in the published materials that would add weight to, and complexity to your argument.
If he's pumping out loads of videos, though.
But I also realised that, like, one, I didn't check when the video was published, so the book what I'm referring to might not have even been published when this video came out. But he brings up some good points about elves in their economy in particular that we've got to pay attention to. They don't age, they don't get sick, and they don't tend to change their leaders very often, which means that their economy will function slightly differently, because they only need to strive for what they want to, and it's very stable, right? Very, very, very stable.
You're not going to want to quit your job because you've got a new manager.
Exactly. So elves, we know, tend to be the artisans, right? So they just tend, we know they have artisans, so elves don't just lay about forever just shagging or whatever. Like they pursue their ideal, like they pursue what they want to do, just like dwarves do. We also know that unlike dwarves, though, the elves don't really need to strive for food for two reasons here, and this is my own. One is that Yavanna provided the earliest elves with corn, so it was very easy to grow. But then also, like, elves in the Third Age tend to live in very wooded areas, so they can either hunt or just gather the food. That's not an issue. And this is where, like, having a fairly static population comes in handy, because you're not always having to, like, fuck the land over because you're constantly expanding your population. So that works for them. And then we've got Thranduil in Mirkwood, which is a bit of an odd one, because he buys all of his shit, like his wine, his apples, his butter, like all of that's brought in. That might be because Mirkwood's been fucked up by Sauron during that time, but who knows. But Thranduil's an odd one because he actually does engage in that trade network of the north of Middle-earth, and that might just be because he loves money and trade and stuff. I don't know, but Thranduil's the odd one out. But like Rivendell and Lothlorien don't really have these concerns of having to buy in goods and sell stuff. And it's also mentioned that the Sindar elves, and this is in the First Age, who weren't ruled by Thingol, practiced cattle and sheep farming as well as growing and harvesting crops. And it said that one of the things they did was grow flax, which they grew and practiced weaving with it.
Very healthy.
Ah. And then there's another First Age note.
Good for the digestion.
In that one of Feanor's sons, Caranthea, became one of the wealthiest people of the First Age, because apparently all of the trading the dwarves did in Beleriand, Caranthea acted as an intermediary in. So again, like with the elves, that's it. It's kind of like the elves, their economy is pursue what we kind of want to do, except Thranduil, who likes wine and maybe he just likes wine and butter and apples, and that's it. That's the three things he buys in, and everything else is just the elves just do whatever they want because they don't have to worry about too much. And then there's Aman, which again, just no fucking clue. It's paradise, right, over there. So probably we know that they do crops, right? Mm-hmm. Aman does have crops because Manwë has a high feast every year when the crops are gathered in, which is their harvest festival.
I've got a question.
Go on.
How much sustenance do elves need to live? Because that will determine their production.
Not much. Because they
it's
don't
not
have
a big deal, is
they
it?
don't have many kids. And remember, Lembas can fill one bite can fill the stomach of a
They're not
grown
exerting
man.
a lot of energy.
Yeah, exactly.
Like dwarves.
Yeah. So I think that their main effort towards food will go when they have feasts or something. When they just want to make
when they celebrate.
When they want to make an occasion of it. Yeah. It's not like
Christmas.
Yeah, it's
Easter,
like
birthdays.
It's work to live, not live to work. No, wait. Yeah. They work to live. They don't live to work. So
you're an elf.
I work to live.
I'm a dwarf.
I'm never going to be on my deathbed thinking, "Oh, I wish I'd wrote more fucking code." Do you know what I mean? Like, no, I'll be talking about like the days like today where we've took our daughter to the forest and we've had a lovely day together and we've had like a fucking 3-day weekend together.
Yeah.
And it's been mint.
Gruffalo hunting.
Exactly. But yeah, that is the economies of Middle-earth. It's a bit of a mad one, bit of a snapshot. If I've missed something, please do tell me. Let's have a conversation. Let's talk about it. If you particularly like something about this episode, let me know. But please do pass us around your friends, like the naughty little people we are. Pass us around like cigarettes in prison, like currency. No, share, like, come and find me on Instagram. Come and engage, come and talk to me. I'm a very friendly person. Don't talk to Becca, she's an absolute bastard though.
No one could find me.
Yeah, true. No, that's it for today. Have you got anything else you want to add?
No, I just really enjoyed the episode. And I will be curious to the response to it because I feel like it's been a tamer episode.
Yeah, it has. It's been a bastard. It's been a weird one to research. So I hope people have found it interesting. And likewise, if you didn't find it interesting, let me know.
Yeah, just skip it.
Yeah, well, no, let me know. Like, hey, Chris, I didn't really find this one interesting compared to your other episodes because all blah. I'm not saying I'll change anything, but it'll be nice for you to get it off your chest.
Yeah. Cathartic.
But right. So that is it from me, Chris. So I'm going to say goodbye till next time.
And goodbye from Rebecca.
Have a good one. Bye.
Bye.